Kicked out at 17, my sister and I bought an abandoned hotel for $8. What it became changed us. If you've ever felt lost, or like the world had already decided who you were, then this story is for you. Maybe you'll see a piece of your own story in mine. If you do, think about subscribing, because this is a place for people who have had to fight for their second chance. The day my life broke for the second time was my 17th birthday. There was no cake, no cards. There was just the worn vinyl of a chair in the county services building, sticking to the back of my legs in the humid August air. The room smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. Opposite me, Miss Albright, our caseworker for the last 6 years, steepled her fingers on her desk. She wasn't a bad person. In the ecosystem of the foster care system, she was just a tired predator, and my sister Maya and I were simply the prey she had to process. Maya sat beside me, her small frame curled into itself. At 15, she had perfected the art of making herself invisible, a skill you learn quickly when you're bounced between 3 group homes and 4 foster families. She was staring at a loose thread on the hem of her jeans, pulling at it with a quiet intensity that meant she was trying not to cry. I wanted to tell her to stop, to look up, but I couldn't find the words. My own throat felt tight, as if filled with dust. "So Leo," Ms. Albright began, her voice flat, practiced. "Happy birthday." It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me, because we both knew what my 17th birthday meant. It was the beginning of the end. The start of the 1-year countdown until I aged out of the system, until I was officially no longer their problem. "As you know," she continued, shuffling a stack of papers that represented the entirety of my state-documented existence, "your 18th birthday will mark your emancipation. We need to start preparing you for that transition." Transition, that's what they called it. It sounded so smooth, so planned, like moving from one room to another. It felt more like being pushed off a cliff. "And Maya?" I asked, my voice cracking on her name. This was the part I dreaded, the part that had kept me awake for months. Ms. Albright's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of humanity before the professional mask snapped back into place. "Maya's situation is different. With you no longer in the home, her placement will be reevaluated. We have a family in Northwood who has shown interest, a good family, no other children. Northwood was 3 hours away. 3 hours or 1,000 miles. It was all the same. It was a severing, the final cut. They had taken everything from us 6 years ago when our parents' car met a patch of black ice on a winter road. Now they were coming for the last thing we had, each other. I felt a familiar, cold rage begin to build in my chest. It was a useless feeling, one I had learned to swallow down like bile, but it was there. Maya's hand snaked across the gap between our chairs and found mine. Her fingers were ice cold. I squeezed back, a silent promise I wasn't sure I could keep. "There is one other piece of business," Ms. Albright said, pulling a large, yellowed manila envelope from a drawer. It looked ancient, brittle at the edges. My name and Maya's were written on the front in a shaky, elegant cursive I hadn't seen in years. "This was left in your grandmother's effects. The instructions were very specific. It was to be given to you, Leo, on your 17th birthday. The state has held it in trust. My grandmother, Elena." The memory of her was like a faded photograph. Warm hands that smelled of lavender and soil, a low, humming voice, a house that felt impossibly big. After the accident, she had tried to take us. For a few blurry months, we lived with her. And then, one day, people like Ms. Albright came, and we were taken away. We were told she was sick, that she couldn't care for us anymore. We were told she gave us up. The story calcified over the years, becoming a hard, painful truth in the center of my heart. She had abandoned us, just like everyone else. I reached for the envelope. It was heavy, thicker than I expected. "What is it?" I asked. "It's a legal matter," Ms. Albright said, her tone shifting to one of cautious officialdom. Your grandmother, Elena Vance, was the owner of a property, the Osprey's Roost Hotel in Port Blossom. Upon her death, and with no other direct heirs of age, the property was placed in a complex trust. The trust stipulated that ownership would transfer to you and your sister, jointly, upon your 17th birthday. The transfer was unconventional. For a nominal fee. My mind struggled to catch up. A hotel? I remembered a big, old house on a cliff, but I was a child. I didn't understand what it was. "We own a hotel?" Maya whispered, her eyes wide for the first time all day. "You own a condemned, derelict building with significant liabilities," Ms. Albright corrected gently. "The property has accrued over $50,000 in back taxes and penalties. It's been slated for demolition by the county for 3 years. There's a standing offer from a development group, Tidewater Holdings, to purchase the land. They've offered to clear the entire tax debt and give you each $500 in exchange for the title." She slid another paper across the desk. A quitclaim deed. All I had to do was sign. All Maya would have to do is sign when she turned 18, but my signature would effectively seal the deal. $500. $1,000 between us. To a kid with $17 to his name, it sounded like a fortune. It was the smart choice. The sensible choice. It was the escape hatch they wanted me to take. Walk away, take the cash, and let the final link to our past be bulldozed into dust. "We have to sign this?" I asked, looking at the line for my signature. "It's the recommended course of action," Ms. Albright said. "It resolves a significant financial burden you are in no position to assume. That money could help you get a deposit on an apartment when you emancipate. It's a clean break, Leo." A clean break. That's what they called taking us from our grandmother, too. I looked at Maya. Her face was a storm of confusion and hope. A hotel. Our own place. The fantasy of it, however insane, was a spark in the suffocating darkness of our lives. I looked down at the thick manila envelope in my hands. It was the last thing from her. A message in a bottle that had waited 6 years to wash ashore. I couldn't just let it go. Not for $1,000. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the sterile room with the force of a slammed door. Ms. Albright blinked. "Excuse me?" "No, we're not signing. Not yet." "Leo, you have to be realistic," she started, her patient tone fraying. "This isn't a game. That debt is real. The condemnation order is real. You don't have any resources." "It's ours," I said, my grip tightening on the envelope. "I want to see it." She sighed, a long, weary exhalation. She looked at me, then at Maya, and for a moment I saw the woman, not the caseworker. I saw a person who had seen 1,000 kids like me make 1,000 bad decisions, born of desperation and pride. "The property is in Port Blossom. It's a 2-hour bus ride. The building is not safe, Leo. The county has posted warnings. You can't live there." "I just want to see it," I repeated, my voice harder now. She saw the set of my jaw, the stubborn fire in my eyes that the system hadn't quite managed to extinguish. She knew she couldn't legally stop me. The property, for all its faults, was mine, ours. She pushed the quitclaim deed back toward her side of the desk. "The offer from Tidewater stands for 90 days. After that, the county will likely move for a tax foreclosure and seize the property anyway. You're just delaying the inevitable." Maybe she was right. But the inevitable could wait. For the first time in 6 years, I had something that belonged to me. A broken down, debt-ridden, condemned hotel on a forgotten piece of coastline. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I stood up, pulling Maya with me. I clutched the envelope to my chest like a shield. Inside it, I could feel the hard, unyielding shape of a key. We walked out of the office, leaving Ms. Albright sitting in the silence. The hallway air felt different, charged with a terrifying new possibility. We were no longer just wards of the state. We were property owners. We were in trouble. And for the first time in a long time, we were heading somewhere that might, just might, be home. The bus ride to Port Blossom was a journey through a landscape of forgetting. We left the concrete grid of the city, the endless sprawl of suburbs, and entered a world of thinning towns and widening skies. The highway narrowed, winding its way along the coast, where the Pacific gnawed restlessly at the land. Maya and I sat with our 2 duffel bags, our entire collected wealth of possessions, at our feet. We didn't talk much. The conversation in Ms. Albright's office had left a ringing in the air, a high-frequency hum of fear and hope. Maya had her headphones on, but I knew she wasn't listening to music. She was just using them to build a wall against the world, against the stares of the other passengers who saw 2 kids who looked like they were running away from something. Or maybe running toward nothing at all. I stared out the window, watching the blur of green and gray. Pine trees, hunched against the perpetual wind. Skeletal fingers of fog creeping through the valleys. The ocean, a vast, indifferent presence, appearing and disappearing between the hills. I finally opened the manila envelope. My hands trembled slightly. Inside, nestled in a bed of brittle legal documents, was the key. It was heavy, made of ornate, tarnished brass. The head was shaped like a bird in flight, an osprey. Below it, a letter, folded into a small, tight square. The paper was thick, creamy, and covered in that same familiar cursive. And beneath that, the deed. It was a dizzying document, full of legalese I couldn't comprehend, but the core of it was clear. For the sum of $1 and other good and valuable consideration, the property known as the Osprey's Roost is hereby transferred to Leo Vance and Maya Vance. A single dollar. Ms. Albright had said $8. I wondered where the other 7 had gone. Probably administrative fees. The system always took its cut. I traced the shape of the key with my thumb. It felt ancient, like it could unlock more than just a door. It felt like a question. Why would our grandmother do this? Why saddle us with a ruin? The official story, the one we'd been fed, was that she couldn't handle us, that her mind and body were failing, and she'd surrendered us to the state for our own good. It was a neat, tidy narrative that absolved the system and left us with a clean, sharp wound of abandonment. But this key, this letter, they didn't fit that story. They were a loose thread, and I had to pull it. The bus hissed to a stop at a lonely depot in what I assumed was the center of Port Blossom. It wasn't so much a town as a collection of buildings clinging to the edge of the continent. The air smelled sharply of salt, diesel, and something else, the slow, sweet scent of decay. A few faded storefronts lined the main street, a bait-and-tackle shop, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a boarded-up movie theater. The whole place seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for either a tidal wave or a tour bus, whichever came first. "Where is it?" Maya asked, pulling her hoodie tighter around herself as a cold gust of wind swept in off the water. I pulled out my phone, the one I'd saved for months to buy. The signal was weak, but I managed to pull up a map. "It's up there," I said, pointing toward a bluff that rose at the north end of town, a dark shape against the bruised purple of the evening sky. The walk was longer than it looked. We trudged up a steep, cracked road, our duffel bags growing heavier with every step. The town fell away below us, and the sound of the ocean grew louder, a constant rhythmic roar. And then we saw it, the Osprey's Roost. It wasn't a house, it was a monster. A 4-story Victorian behemoth perched precariously on the cliff's edge. It was a symphony of architectural madness, turrets, gables, wraparound porches, and a widow's walk that looked like a crown of thorns. Every inch of it was in a state of terminal decline. The paint, once probably a cheerful white, was now a leprous patchwork of gray and raw, weathered wood. Windows were boarded over with mismatched planks. A section of the main porch had collapsed, its roof sagging like a broken jaw. A sign, hanging from a single rusted chain, creaked in the wind. The words, "The Osprey's Roost," were barely legible beneath layers of grime and seagull droppings. It was magnificent and terrifying. "Leo," Maya breathed, her voice full of awe and horror. "It's big." "It's a wreck," I said, but even as I said it, I felt a strange pull. This wreck was ours. We approached the front steps, which groaned in protest under our weight. A large, official-looking notice was nailed to the front door, its red letters stark against the faded wood. "Condemned. Unsafe for human habitation. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I ripped it off. This was our property. We couldn't be trespassers. I slid the heavy brass key into the lock. For a moment, it wouldn't turn, seized by years of salt and rust. I put my shoulder into it, jiggling the key back and forth, a desperate, frantic motion. Finally, with a gut-wrenching screech of metal on metal, the lock gave way. The door swung inward on a long, low groan, opening a slash of darkness into the building's heart. The air that poured out was thick, stale, and cold. It smelled of dust, mildew, and the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten conversations. We stepped inside. We were standing in the lobby. It must have been grand once, a vast, 2-story space with a sweeping central staircase. Now it was a mausoleum. Furniture, plush velvet chairs, elegant side tables, was draped in white sheets, making them look like a congregation of shrouded figures. A thick carpet of dust covered every surface, softening the edges of the world. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grimy, boarded-up windows, cutting dusty golden shafts through the gloom. A grand piano stood in one corner, its lid closed, its silence more profound than any sound. Maya sneezed, a small, sharp noise that echoed unnervingly in the vast space. "It's like a tomb," she whispered. I couldn't disagree. But it was our tomb. We spent the next hour exploring, moving like cautious archaeologists through the ruins of a lost civilization. The ground floor held a cavernous dining room, tables and chairs stacked in a corner like a pile of bones. The kitchen was a nightmare of rusted steel and peeling linoleum, a single pot still sitting on the stove as if waiting for a cook who had vanished mid-stir. We climbed the grand staircase, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The upper floors were a labyrinth of guest rooms, each one a variation on the same theme of decay. Peeling wallpaper, stained mattresses, curtains that disintegrated at a touch. In some rooms, personal effects had been left behind. A book left open on a nightstand, a pair of shoes by a bed, a child's drawing on a wall. Each one was a tiny, poignant mystery. It was overwhelming. The sheer scale of the neglect was a physical weight. Every room we entered was another testament to our own foolishness. Ms. Albright was right. This was impossible. This wasn't a home. It was a grave we had just purchased. We finally found a suite at the end of the 4th-floor hallway that was different. A heavy oak door with a brass plaque that read, "The Proprietor." This had been our grandmother's. It was cleaner than the other rooms, as if someone had taken care to prepare it. The furniture wasn't covered. A large 4-poster bed stood against one wall, a handmade quilt folded neatly at its foot. A writing desk sat before a large bay window that overlooked the ocean. Even with boards on the outside, a faint silver light bled through the cracks. It was still dusty, still neglected, but it felt different. It felt like a sanctuary. This was where she had lived. This was where she had slept and read and looked out at the sea. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool wood of the writing desk. This was real. She was real, not just a story they told us. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, bouncing gently. The springs gave a mournful creak. "Can we stay here, Leo?" she asked, her voice small. "Just for tonight?" I looked around the room, at the gathering shadows. We had nowhere else to go. We had about $50 left between us. "Yeah," I said, "just for tonight." We sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, sharing a bag of chips we'd bought at the bus station. It was the first thing we'd eaten in hours. The silence of the hotel pressed in on us, punctuated by the groan of the old building settling and the distant, constant roar of the waves. It was time. I pulled the folded letter from my pocket. The paper felt fragile, important. "It's from her," I said to Maya, my voice hushed. "From Grandma Elena." I unfolded it carefully. The page was filled with that elegant, looping script, the ink slightly faded but still perfectly clear. I took a deep breath and I began to read aloud. "My dearest Leo and Maya," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the world has turned in its slow, cruel way for 6 long years. I hope you are reading this together. I hope the system has not managed to break the bond between you. It is the strongest thing I have ever known. First, and most important, you must know that I did not give you up. Not willingly. I would have sooner cut out my own heart. They took you, and I want you to know why." I paused, my throat thick. Maya had her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes fixed on the letter in my hands. "After your parents were gone," I continued reading, "I was all you had, and you were all I had. This hotel, this beautiful, crumbling beast, was my life's work, but you became my life's meaning. But Port Blossom was changing. A development company, Tidewater Holdings, came to town. They saw our coastline not as a home, but as a commodity. They started buying up properties, pushing people out with lowball offers and high-pressure tactics. They wanted my hotel. They wanted this cliff. The view is worth millions to men like that. They made an offer. I refused. So they started to play dirty. They had friends on the town council. Suddenly, I was being hit with fines. Code violations for things that had been overlooked for 50 years. My taxes were reassessed at a punitive rate. They were bleeding me dry, and they knew it. At the same time, my health was failing. The doctors were using words I didn't want to hear. I was getting weaker, and the vultures were circling. They saw their chance. They started whispering to the county, to social services. An old, sick woman, a mountain of debt, a dangerous, crumbling hotel. Is that really a suitable place for 2 small, traumatized children? They painted me as an unfit guardian, and because I was poor and sick, the picture stuck. They used the law like a weapon. The day they came for you was the worst day of my life. I fought, I screamed, I pleaded. But I was one old woman against a system designed to protect itself. They told me you would be better off, safer. It was a lie, but it was a lie the court believed. I knew I was going to lose you, and I knew I was dying. I had one last move to make, one last thing I could do to protect the only 2 things I had left, you and this place. I went to the one lawyer in town they hadn't bought, a man on the verge of retirement named Samuel Jones. We found a loophole, a strange, forgotten piece of state trust law. We created a trust that would shield the hotel from my creditors and from Tidewater. They couldn't seize an asset that was held in trust for minors under the care of the state. The ownership would transfer to you on Leo's 17th birthday, a date I chose because I prayed you would have the strength and sense by then to understand. It cost me the last of my savings, and it cost Mr. Jones his quiet retirement. He fought for me, for you. The transfer was made for a symbolic $1, a pittance to make it legal. It was all I could do. It was my last defiant roar against the dying of the light. I know what they have left you, a ruin, a debt, an impossible choice. And for that, I am so sorry. I am sorry I couldn't give you a clean, easy inheritance. I could only give you a battlefield. But this place, Leo, Maya, this place is more than just a building. It is your history. It is your legacy. It is built on the bones of your great-grandparents who settled this cliff when there was nothing here but wind and rock. It has survived storms and wars and the Great Depression. It is resilient, just like you. Now, for the choice. I have not left you defenseless. In the sunroom, on the east side of the ground floor, there is a loose floorboard beneath the window seat, where the morning sun first greets the sea. Underneath it, you will find a metal box. Inside is what I managed to save, cash, hidden from the banks and the courts. It is not a fortune, but it is enough. It is enough for you to take, to go somewhere new, and to start a life free from all of this. No one would blame you. You have earned an easy path. That is your first choice. Take the money and run. Be free. But there is a second choice. You can stay. You can use that money to fight. You can pay the most immediate taxes and stop the foreclosure. You can hold on. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. This hotel will demand your blood, your sweat, your tears. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to fight, you will not just be saving a building. You will be reclaiming your story. The choice is yours, and yours alone. Whatever you decide, know that I have loved you every second of every day you have been gone. Know that I am proud of you. You are Vance's children. We do not break easily. Your loving grandmother, Elena. The letter ended. I folded it slowly, the paper now feeling sacred in my hands. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a choked sob from Maya. I looked at her, and tears were streaming down her face, silent and steady. And then I realized I was crying too. Not loud, racking sobs, but the quiet, hot tears of a pain that had finally found a name. We hadn't been abandoned. We had been protected. We hadn't been thrown away. We had been hidden away, like treasure. This crumbling hotel wasn't a punishment. It was a fortress. Our grandmother hadn't been weak. She had been a warrior, fighting a battle we never even knew was happening. I cried for the 6 years we had spent believing we were unwanted. I cried for the grandmother we had lost twice, once to the system and once to a lie. And I cried for the boy I had been, who had built a wall of anger around his heart to keep from feeling the pain of that lie. Maya leaned her head against my shoulder, and we just sat there for a long time as the last of the light faded from the sky. Two orphans in a haunted hotel, holding the truth in our hands. The weight of it was immense. It was a gift and a burden all at once. The night in the hotel was long and cold. We didn't have sleeping bags, only our jackets and the dusty quilt from our grandmother's bed. We pushed the heavy bed against the door and huddled together for warmth, sleeping in short, fitful bursts. Every creak of the old building, every moan of the wind, sounded like an intruder. But the real ghosts were the ones our grandmother's letter had conjured. The ghost of her love, the ghost of her fight, and the terrifying ghost of the choice she had left us. In the faint gray light of dawn, we were both awake. The air was frigid. I could see my breath. "The sunroom," Maya said, her voice a sleepy murmur against my arm. "Where the morning sun first greets the sea." It was the only thing to do, the only way forward. We left the sanctuary of the proprietor's suite and made our way back down the grand staircase, our footsteps kicking up clouds of dust in the pale light. The sunroom was on the ground floor, a large space enclosed by a crescent of tall, arched windows. Even with the boards, you could tell it was designed to catch the light. A long window seat ran along the curve of the wall. We knelt before it, the floorboards cold against our knees. Underneath the window seat, I recited, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I ran my hands along the dusty planks. They were all tight, seamless. I knocked on them, listening to the sound. Thud, thud, thud. It all sounded the same. "Maybe she meant outside," Maya suggested. "No," I said, my focus narrowing. "In the sunroom. A loose floorboard." I went back to the center of the window seat, directly opposite where the sun would rise. I pressed down on each board, one by one, testing for any give. And then I found it. A single plank that shifted just a fraction of an inch under my weight. It didn't look different from the others, but it felt different. There was a hollow space beneath it. There was no handle, no notch to pull it up. I took out the only tool I had, a small multi-tool I'd gotten for my 15th birthday. I worked the edge of the flathead screwdriver into the seam, prying gently. The old wood splintered and groaned. I worked it back and forth, slowly, carefully, until I could get my fingers underneath. I lifted. The board came up with a soft sigh of displaced air, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity. And nestled inside, just as she'd said, was a metal box. It was an old cash box, heavy and black, secured with a simple lock. It was locked, of course. For a moment, my heart sank. But then Maya pointed to the keyhole. "Leo, the key! The hotel key!" It seemed too simple, too poetic. But I took the ornate brass key from my pocket. The head of the osprey felt cool in my palm. I slid it into the lock on the box. It was a perfect fit. I turned it, and with a satisfying click, the box unlocked. We looked at each other, a silent, breathless moment. This was it. The choice. I lifted the lid. I don't know what I was expecting. Gold bars, jewels. What I saw was far more practical, and in its own way, far more beautiful. It was cash. Stacks of it, bundled neatly with rubber bands. 20s, 50s, hundreds. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I started pulling the bundles out, my hands shaking. Maya counted them as I placed them on the floor. 10,000, 20, 30, $42,680. It was a staggering amount. It was a new life. It was a one-way ticket to anywhere. It was a security deposit on an apartment, a used car, community college. It was the easy path. It was freedom. We just stared at it, this pile of paper that could change everything. The silence stretched on, filled only by the sound of the ocean. "We could go," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "We could go to California or Oregon, get an apartment. You could finish school. I could go to a normal high school." She was verbalizing the dream that was screaming in my own head. A normal life. No more group homes, no more caseworkers, no more feeling like a ghost in someone else's house. Just us. Together. Safe. I looked around the dusty, decaying sunroom. I looked at the boarded-up windows and the peeling paint. I thought of the $50,000 tax bill. I thought of the powerful development company that had crushed our grandmother. The fight seemed impossible, ludicrous. We were two kids with a box of cash against a whole system. We would lose. We would end up with nothing, broken and homeless. Taking the money was the only logical choice. "But she fought," I said, the words coming out before I had even thought them. "She lost everything, and she kept fighting. She gave us this place. She gave us this choice." I picked up one of the bundles of cash. It felt heavy with responsibility. This wasn't just money, it was our grandmother's last stand. It was her faith in us. To take it and run felt like a betrayal. It felt like agreeing with the people who said she was just a crazy old woman and this place was just a worthless ruin. "This is our home, Leo," Maya said, her voice gaining a strength I had never heard before. "Even like this, it's the only one we've ever really had." I looked at my sister. The scared, invisible girl was gone. In her place was someone with fire in her eyes, the same fire I felt in my own chest. She wasn't a kid I had to protect anymore. She was my partner. The decision landed on me, not like a weight, but like an anchor. It was terrifying, but it was solid. It held me in place. "Okay," I said. We stay. We fight. A slow smile spread across Maya's face. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in years. It was like the sun coming up. But as I started putting the money back in the box, my hand brushed against something else at the bottom. Another envelope. This one was thick, sealed with wax. I broke the seal and pulled out a sheaf of papers. They weren't a letter. They were documents. Photocopies of emails, bank statements, internal memos from Tidewater Holdings, signed affidavits from other Port Blossom residents who had been threatened or defrauded. My grandmother hadn't just been fighting a defensive war. She had been gathering intelligence. She had been building a case. There was evidence of illegal waste dumping on land adjacent to the hotel. There were memos discussing a strategy of attrition against local homeowners. There was a paper trail that led directly to the company's CEO and his connection on the town council. This changed everything. This wasn't just a defensive fight to save our home anymore. This was an attack. Our grandmother had left us more than a shield. She had left us a sword. Suddenly the fight didn't seem so impossible. It was still daunting, but it wasn't hopeless. We had resources, we had a legacy, and now we had ammunition. We were no longer just two kids against the world. We were the heirs to a righteous fight, and we were armed. We closed the box, slid the floorboard back into place, and stood up. The sun was higher now, and a bright sliver of light had found a crack between the boards on a window, illuminating a swirling galaxy of dust motes. The hotel didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a sleeping giant, and we had just been given the task of waking it up. The first thing we did was practical. We walked down the hill and into town, two kids on a mission. We found the diner with the flickering sign. It was called the Salty Spoon. Inside, a handful of fishermen were hunched over coffee, and a woman with a tired but kind face was working the grill. We ordered the biggest breakfast they had and ate like we hadn't seen food in a week. It was the best meal of my life. Fueled by bacon and a new sense of purpose, we found the only law office in town. The sign on the door was faded. Samuel Jones, attorney at law. Our grandmother's lawyer. A stooped, elderly man answered the door, looking at us over the top of his spectacles. He looked like he had retired 10 years ago and nobody had told him. "Mr. Jones?" I asked. "I'm Leo Vance. This is my sister Maya. Elena Vance was our grandmother." The man's eyes widened. He ushered us inside, into an office piled high with books and dusty files. "I'll be," he breathed, sinking into his chair. "Elena's grandchildren. I wondered if you'd ever show up. I drafted that trust myself, a beautiful piece of legal defiance. Your grandmother was a lioness." We spent the next 2 hours with him. We showed him the documents from the box. As he read, his tired eyes grew sharp and focused. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Good heavens, Elena," he murmured to himself. "You magnificent woman. You actually got them." He explained the legal situation in terms we could understand. The documents were a bombshell. They were enough to launch a state investigation, to challenge the tax assessments, to file a countersuit against Tidewater for predatory practices. But it would be a long, expensive fight. "They'll try to bury us in motions," he warned. "They have deep pockets." "We have this," I said, patting my jacket where I'd stashed the cash box key. I explained about the money our grandmother had left. Mr. Jones leaned back, a look of profound respect on his face. "She thought of everything," he said. He agreed to take the case. He said it would be the last and best fight of his career. He directed us to the county tax office. We walked in and, with a kind of delirious, surreal confidence, paid $15,000 in cash toward our back taxes. The payment was enough to officially halt the foreclosure proceedings and get the county off our backs, at least for a while. The clerk, a woman who looked like she'd seen it all, didn't even blink at the pile of 20s and 50s. She just stamped our receipt and handed it to us. That piece of paper was our first victory. It was proof that we were here, that we were fighting back. That night, we went back to the hotel not as trespassers or squatters, but as owners. We still slept in our grandmother's room, but it felt different. We weren't hiding anymore. We were home. The weeks that followed were a blur of hard work. The legal battle began immediately, with Mr. Jones filing a flurry of motions that sent a shockwave through Tidewater's corporate offices. They responded with their own team of slick city lawyers, and the war of paper began. But our war was more tangible. We lived in the hotel. We had to make it livable. We started with one room, the kitchen. It was a Herculean task. We scrubbed away years of grime, fought back armies of rust, and disinfected every surface until our hands were raw. We used some of the cash to buy a small refrigerator and a hot plate. The first meal we cooked in that kitchen, simple pasta with sauce from a jar, felt like a 5-star feast. From there, we moved on to the rest of the hotel, one small section at a time. It was a process of triage. We couldn't fix everything, so we focused on what mattered. We tore down the rotten section of the porch. We used thick plastic sheeting and a staple gun to cover the broken windows, a temporary but effective way to keep the wind and rain out. We swept and scrubbed and dusted until our muscles ached. We were archaeologists, janitors, and demolition experts all at once. Slowly, painstakingly, the hotel began to breathe again. We started to get visitors. At first, they were just curious locals, drawn by the lights they saw in the windows at night. An old man named Gus, a retired carpenter, stopped by one afternoon. He'd known our grandmother. Elena was a tough old bird, he said, chewing on an unlit pipe. Glad to see her spirits still in this place. He saw the work we were doing, the pathetic tools we were using. The next day, he came back with his own toolbox and a truck full of scrap lumber. He spent a week with us, teaching me how to properly patch the leaking roof, how to reinforce a sagging floor joist. He never asked for a dime. The woman from the Salty Spoon, whose name was Marge, started dropping off hot meals for us every few days. "Can't have you two wasting away," she'd say, bustling into our clean kitchen and leaving behind a casserole that smelled like heaven. People started talking. The story of Elena's grandkids, the 2 kids from the system who were trying to save the old hotel, spread through the town. We were no longer just outsiders. We were becoming part of the fabric of Port Blossom. We were Elena Vance's legacy, come home at last. Maya found her place in the dirt. Behind the hotel was a neglected garden, choked with weeds and thorns. She claimed it as her own. She spent hours out there, clearing, digging, planting. She used a small portion of our funds to buy seeds. By the time autumn began to creep in, she had a small, thriving patch of vegetables and herbs. It was her own victory, a small pocket of life wrested from the decay. Not everyone was happy to see us. One evening, a sleek black car pulled up outside. A man in an expensive suit got out. He didn't introduce himself, but I knew who he was. He was from Tidewater. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "This building is a teardown. You're sitting on a winning lottery ticket, and you're trying to use it as a blanket. Sign the deed. Take the money. We'll even double the offer. $20,000. Clean. Gone." "It's not for sale," I said, my voice steady. He smiled, a thin, predatory smile. "Your kid's playing house. You have no idea what you're up against. This town needs progress. It needs jobs. You're standing in the way of that. This sentimental attachment to a pile of rotting wood is going to cost you everything." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and menace in his wake. The threat was clear. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I was angry, and I was home. Winter rolled in, fierce and wet. The wind howled around the old hotel, testing Gus's roof patches and my plastic-covered windows. There were nights the building groaned so loudly I was sure it was about to collapse around us. We lived mostly in the kitchen and our grandmother's suite, closing off the rest of the hotel to conserve heat from the electric space heaters we'd bought. The legal fight dragged on, a slow, grinding war of attrition, just as Mr. Jones had predicted. Tidewater's lawyers tried to drown us in paperwork, but Mr. Jones, fueled by Marge's coffee and a lifetime of righteous indignation, matched them move for move. The documents our grandmother had collected were undeniable. A state environmental agency had opened an investigation into the illegal dumping. The local paper, emboldened by the lawsuit, started running stories about Tidewater's history in other coastal towns. The narrative was shifting. We weren't just sentimental kids anymore. We were the underdog protagonists in a story the whole town was watching. During those long, dark winter months, the hotel became my whole world. I learned its rhythms, its secrets. I knew which floorboards creaked, which doors whistled in the wind, which rooms held the afternoon light the longest. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a living thing, and we were its caretakers. I thought a lot about the word inheritance. Before, I would have thought it meant money or property, something you get. But I was learning it was something you do. Our grandmother hadn't just left us a hotel and a box of cash. She had left us a purpose. She had left us a community that was slowly, cautiously embracing us. She had left us a chance to build something instead of just surviving. I looked at Maya, who was sketching plans for her spring garden by the light of a lamp. She was thriving. She had a confidence and a sense of self I had never seen in her. The hotel was saving her, just as we were saving it. We weren't just the kids who got kicked out. We were the kids who came home. The fight wasn't over. It wasn't even close. The lawsuit was looming, and our money was dwindling, spent on legal fees, taxes, and the bare necessities of life and repair. But we weren't just surviving anymore. We were building. We had turned a ruin into a refuge. We had turned an inheritance of debt into an inheritance of purpose. We were learning that home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you make. It's the roof you patch, the garden you plant, the community you build. It's the fight you choose. And looking out the window of my grandmother's room, at the dark, churning ocean under a winter moon, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we had chosen the right one. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The relentless coastal rain softened into misty mornings, and the sun, when it appeared, felt warm on the skin. Maya's garden exploded into a riot of green. The first radishes she pulled from the earth felt like jewels. The hotel, too, seemed to exhale after the long winter. We had survived. The legal battle with Tidewater was crawling toward a court date. The state's investigation had confirmed illegal dumping on the adjacent property, and the company was facing massive fines and a public relations nightmare. Their lawyers had approached Mr. Jones with a settlement offer. It was substantial. Enough to clear all the back taxes, establish a trust for Maya and me, and leave us with a significant sum. It was everything we could have hoped for. But it came with one condition. We had to agree to a gag order, and we had to sell the hotel to them for a token amount. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to erase us. They wanted to tear down the Osprey's roost, and with it, the story of our grandmother's defiance. We sat in Mr. Jones's dusty office, the settlement offer on the table between us. It was the easy path, presented to us once again. Financial security for the rest of our lives. An end to the fight. "What do you want to do?" Mr. Jones asked, his gaze resting on me. I looked at Maya. We didn't even need to speak. We had come too far to turn back now. "We refuse," I said. "We're keeping the hotel." Mr. Jones beamed. "I was hoping you'd say that." So the fight continued, but something else was happening too. Our story, thanks to the local paper and the town's gossip mill, had started to spread. A blogger who wrote about unique architectural restoration projects found our story and drove up the coast to interview us. She took pictures of the hotel, of us covered in dust and paint, of Maya's garden. She wrote a long, heartfelt post about the two orphans fighting a corporate giant to save their ancestral home. It went viral, and then the emails started coming in. People from all over the country, all over the world. People who had been in foster care. People who had fought developers. People who had inherited crumbling old houses. They sent messages of support. They shared their own stories, and they sent money. A friend of the blogger helped us set up a crowdfunding page. We set a modest goal, enough to fix the plumbing and wiring. We hit that goal in a day. The donations kept pouring in. $10 from a student in Ohio, $50 from a family in England who loved old Victorian buildings, $1,000 from a man in Texas who said our story reminded him of his own fight to save his family's ranch. It was an avalanche of support, of human kindness. It was overwhelming. We realized the story of the Osprey's Roost wasn't just our story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt small and powerless against a big, uncaring system. It was a symbol of resilience. With the crowdfunding money, our world changed again. We weren't just patching holes anymore. We were rebuilding. We hired Gus and a small crew of local carpenters and tradespeople who were eager for the work. The sounds of hammers and saws filled the air, a music of resurrection. We replaced the roof, properly this time. We installed new, energy-efficient windows. We rewired the entire building and installed a new plumbing system. We didn't have the money to restore it to its former Gilded Age glory. That wasn't the point. We were making it safe, warm, and functional. We were bringing it back to life. Our vision for the hotel began to solidify. It would never be a luxury resort for tourists. It was a home. And maybe it could be a home for others, too. We started to dream of turning it into a non-profit community space. A youth hostel, maybe, specifically for kids aging out of the foster system. A place for them to land, to have a transition that wasn't a cliff's edge. A place with workshops for practical skills, with a big communal kitchen, with a garden they could tend. A place that said, "You are not alone. You have a home here." The final confrontation with Tidewater didn't happen in a courtroom. Faced with mounting legal fees, terrible press, and a state prosecution, they finally folded. They dropped their lawsuit. They paid their environmental fines. And they quietly sold off their other holdings in Port Blossom and left town. There was no triumphant victory speech on the courthouse steps. Just a quiet phone call from Mr. Jones, telling us it was over. We had won. That evening, Maya and I walked out to the widow's walk on the roof, which Gus had just finished reinforcing. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The town of Port Blossom was spread out below us, its lights beginning to twinkle on. The wind was gentle, the air clean. The Osprey's Roost stood solid beneath our feet, no longer groaning, but humming with a new life. It was still a work in progress. It would always be a work in progress. Just like us. I thought about that day in Ms. Albright's office, the day I turned 17. It felt like a lifetime ago. That boy, Leo, was so full of anger and fear. A kid who believed the world had abandoned him. He wouldn't recognize the person I was becoming. A person who knew how to patch a roof, how to read a legal document, how to lead a team of volunteers. A person who had a home. A person who had a purpose. Maya stood beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine. She was no longer the invisible girl. She was a gardener, a planner, a dreamer. She was the heart of this whole operation. She would be proud of us, Maya said quietly, looking out at the horizon. Yeah, I said, my throat tight. She would be. We didn't just inherit a hotel. We inherited a story. And now, we were learning how to write our own ending. Or rather, our own new beginning. This place, the Osprey's Roost, it didn't just change. we changed with it. It taught us that your past doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a foundation. It taught us that home isn't about four walls. It's about the fight you're willing to wage for what you believe in, and the community that rises up to fight alongside you. And it taught us that the most valuable things in this world are the things you can't put a price on: loyalty, legacy, and a second chance. The work is far from over. Every day is a new challenge, a new leak to fix, a new bill to pay. But every day, we are building. We are creating a place of refuge, a beacon for other kids who feel lost in the storm. And that's a story worth telling. So I want to ask you, what did this story teach you about the meaning of home? Have you ever had to fight for something that everyone else told you was worthless? I want you to share your story in the comments below. I'll be reading them. Because this channel, this community, it's not just about my story. It's about all of ours. It's a place to remind each other that even when you feel kicked out and forgotten, you have the power to build your own home, to reclaim your own story. If that's a journey you want to be a part of, please subscribe, join our community. Let's build something together. From the edge of the world, here at the Osprey's Roost, we're just getting started.